Hello everybody and welcome to Guide London. I'm Blue Badge Tourist Guide Alex Hetherington. Our broadcast today is a lifeboat challenge, and it's a life and death stakes couldn't be higher challenge. Our show today is going to be introduced by Caroline Piper, and here she comes. Caroline.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everybody. As Alex said, my name is Caroline Piper. I'm a London Blue Badge tourist guide, one of the many guides on the Guide London website. And if you haven't already realised, we are running broadcasts 3 times a week on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 4 p.m. British time to try and cheer you all up during this rather boring lockdown. So Monday's our Culture Day, and we've had some broadcasts on films and books set in London, food, look at a couple of our great museums. Wednesday is History Day, and we've looked at the Great Fire of London, the Blitz, the fabulous King George IV, and Westminster Abbey. Fridays is Fun Fridays, and we've had a couple of fantastic quizzes. And I hope you'll enjoy our competition today. So, Blue Badge Tourist Guides, we are the stringently trained and examined professional tour guides in London and in the UK. And we spend quite a lot of our time trying to give a positive point of view. But let's face it, not all of our monarchs have been perfect. In fact, some have been an awful lot less than perfect. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. The competition is who was the most useless British monarch ever? I invite you to all take part. We would very, very much welcome your comments during the show. And after the show, please feel free to share with your friends and family. You can find the show on the Guide London Facebook, Twitter and YouTube channels. So you can rewatch it or watch it at your leisure. So let me set the scene for you. We are not in my flat in North London. We are in a lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's a number of British sailors representing the common people. I am one of those. And we have 3 monarchs in the boat: King Richard III, King Charles I, and Queen Anne. Now, unfortunately, the boat is too heavy and it is beginning to sink. So one of these monarchs is going to have to be thrown overboard in order to save everyone else on the lifeboat. I'm going to invite them to make their case to me, representing the British people, and then I get the joyous task of choosing who should die in order to save everybody else. So, who was the most useless British monarch ever? We're going to start with monarch number 1, King Richard III. Now, for those of you who need a little bit of a memory refresh, King Richard III is our last Plantagenet king. He became king in 1483 at the end of about 30 years of warfare, known as the Wars of the Roses. And he inherited the throne from his older brother Edward IV, who had left the throne to 2 young sons. More on those later. He was king for a couple of years before being defeated by Henry Tudor, who founded the Tudor dynasty. So welcome, Richard III. And please tell us, Richard, why were you such an amazing... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm introducing all the monarchs as well. I do beg your pardon, King Charles I. Here is King Charles I, our 17th century monarch. He reigned from 1625 to 1649. You will know him because he was monarch during the terrible Civil War period. And he is the monarch who ended up having his head chopped off. If you've seen him in paintings, he's usually followed by lots of very cute brown and white little King Charles Spaniels. So that is contender number 2. Contender number 3 is Queen Anne, looking beautiful today, Queen Anne. Thank you, lovely wave. Queen Anne was queen at the beginning of the 18th century. She was queen for about 12 years. Sadly, due to the tragic death of all her children, she is the last of our Stuart monarchs. And at the end of her reign, we started with all the Georges and the introduction of the Hanoverian dynasty. So those are our three contenders. And I'm going to start chronologically with King Richard III and invite you, Richard, to tell us why you were such a good monarch and deserve to keep your place in our lifeboat.
It has been a hard day's night, and I have been working like a dog. It has been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do make me feel all right. Thus spake the jester Peter Sellers, in tribute to celebrated thespian Sir Laurence Olivier's homage to me, channeled in the lyrics of some mop-haired minstrels, the Beatles. With their assistance, I made it to number 14 in the music charts in 1965. It has indeed been a hard day's night for me, Richard, sometime King of England, the third of that name. For 527 years, I languished beneath a municipal car park, following the untimely demise wrought by the hand of treachery, aged just 32, at Bosworth Field on 22nd August 1485. Apologies for the improvised crown. The real one tumbled from my helmet during that last melee when I stumbled over a hawthorn bush. Just before my eyes flickered close, I witnessed the traitorous Lord Stanley about to place it on the victorious brow of that vile usurper, Henry Tudor. Oh, it could have been so different. What I could have accomplished in a longer reign. As it is, in a mere 2 years, I punched vastly above my weight, a valiant warrior during the turbulent dynastic conflict, that horticultural holocaust known as the Wars of the Roses. Losing my father and a brother when I was just 8, I cut my teeth fighting for my eldest brother, King Edward IV, at Barnet and Tewkesbury. Not bad for a bottled spider, an elvish-marked abortive rooting hog, and poisonous bunchback toad, with which calumnious description I was defamed by the slanderous sycophant Shakespeare. On the contrary, gaze upon my likeness in the National Portrait Gallery, and you have to confess, I'm a bit hot. A Plantagenet pin-up, no less. What about this lovely facial reconstruction? Did you see what I did there? Propelled to power by the premature exit of Brother Edward, I exchanged a useful career in regional administration for politics on the national stage. As king, I embarked on a program of strong and stable government, effecting legal reforms, addressing corruption, and even founding the College of Arms, the authority governing all matters of heraldry. Do you like my own heraldic device, the white boar, blanc sanglier? With such awesome responsibility, there came sacrifices. It was necessary, in order to clear my path to the throne, to suppress my natural avuncular instincts and have my 2 nephews, Edward's sons, declared bastards. I use the word in the legal sense, of course. I abhor profanity. Nevertheless, I awarded them comfortable accommodation in that commodious and delightful royal palace, the Tower of London. The early promise of my all too brief tenure on the crown was contaminated by the contagion of rebellion. Still reeling over the loss of my son, another Edward, and my sweet wife Anne, I was forced to confront the impudent malice of the Welsh upstart, treasonous Tudor, and his rabble of foreign mercenaries and traitors. My defining moment came at Bosworth. Spotting the Tudor's banner, I spurred my destrier, white Surrey, and hurled myself at the impudent varlet at the head of 100 knights of my household. It was the last hurrah of the Middle Ages, and so nearly succeeded in its objective. I impaled the standard-bearer William Brandon on the point of my lance and unhorsed Sir John Cheney before the perfidious Stanleys entered the fray on the wrong side, sustaining at least 10 lethal wounds, 2 aimed at my unprotected head. I was killed alone, even my enemies conceded, fighting manfully in the thickest press of my enemies. Swashbuckling stuff, though getting a dagger thrust in my buttocks was the ignominious low point, literally. Not quite the end of my story, however. Thanks to the Richard III Society, the University of Leicester Archaeological Services, and the unremitting zeal of a soothsayer, Philippa Langley, the Looking for Richard project found me. In 2012, the English Tutankhamun emerged from his car park sepulchre to become the most celebrated archaeological discovery of modern times. I've revealed so much about the minutiae of medieval life, my rich seafood diet, horrendous battle injuries, my infamous deformity, scoliosis, actually. It didn't hold back Usain Bolt. I even suffered from roundworm. I wondered what that itch was. Meticulous genealogical research identified a 17th generation descendant whose mitochondrial DNA was compared with a specimen provided by me, confirming our relationship. So I'm a miracle of science as well. I now lie in a splendid tomb wrought from Swale stone in Leicester Cathedral. I was reinterred in a magnificent ceremony in 2015, conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, attended by a representative of the present monarch, Elizabeth II. Grant me the carving of my name. Those relics bless, an unknown, unfelt loss, lost long, forever found, the well-crafted eulogy of the poet laureate spoken by another thespian, the ubiquitous Benedict Cumberbatch, who claims descent from me. And who wouldn't? I'm the best thing that has happened to Leicester since glam rock group Show Watty, TV football pundit Gary Lineker, and another prodigy of nature, the Elephant Man. Undoubtedly, my appearance inspired the reincarnation of the Foxes, Leicester City FC, who cheated odds of 5,000 to 1 to seize the Premier League title in 2016. So, for my inordinate contribution to our natural history and cultural life, out of all proportion to the brevity of my reign, I implore you to spare me from the gloomy wave.
I mean, Richard, what a declaration. I'm loath to question you, but as you might have noticed, a little comment flashed up before my eyes saying boo hiss. And I feel I'm duty bound to address the most controversial stain on your reputation, which is that in April 1483, when your brother died, he left two young sons, 12 and 9. Now, you said you put them in the comfortable surroundings of the Tower of London. Okay, it's a royal palace, I'm with you so far. But the fact is, in July of 1483, you had them declared bastards, as you said, and you were crowned king. And no one ever saw them again. They disappeared. And it was rumoured at the time they'd been murdered. And a couple of 100 years later, people did find two skeletons of two little boys hidden under a staircase leading up to the royal chapel in the central tower. So I have to put it to you, King Richard III, you had the means, you had the motive, you had the opportunity. Did you kill your nephews?
Well, first of all, my seizure of the throne was politically expedient to avoid the disaster of the Wars of the Roses, which happened in the minority of another young king. So I took the throne for the public good. My nephews consigned to comfortable accommodation in the Tower, and I'm not responsible for the tittle-tattle which arose and the vile calumny of my responsibility for their deaths, as far as I'm concerned, when I threw in my lot with Henry Tudor at Bosworth Field. They were still alive, and I put it to you, Miss Piper, that it was the victor who wrote the history of this period, and to whom the responsibility of their alleged murder. Show me the bodies, show me the evidence, not lie.
Well, I will reflect on your words. I won't reach any precipitous judgments, because I think it's time to meet contender number 2, King Charles I. Hello, King Charles I, looking very regal. I particularly love the beard, very elegant. As I said in my introduction, you were king during the Civil War years. So it doesn't necessarily sound like things are going to be too good for you, but I'm sure you have your own explanation. So please do explain to me, Charles I, why you deserve a place in our lifeboat.
Right, let's get things on the level straight off. I don't know who you think you are, Mistress Caroline, but I don't need to explain anything to you or this Guide London full stop org full stop up. I'm choosing to be here because I'm bored on lockdown. But it's my right as king to answer to whoever I choose to answer to. Why am I the worst king? This is I've never come across a more seditious question than this. A king and a subject are clean different things. You cannot judge a king, look, there's the crown, by the same standards by which you judge some modern day prime minister. A king is anointed, chosen by God to rule over his people. So you can't judge me by those standards. And I'm not just making this idea up off the top of my head. No, it says so in the Bible. Now, I don't know if you've ever read the Bible. I have. I'm the head of the church. And by the way, my dad wrote the Bible. But here we go. First book of Samuel, chapter 10, verse 1. Then Samuel took a jar of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head, kissed him and said, "The Lord anoints you as ruler of his people." So do you want to argue against the Bible? No, didn't think you did. That would be blasphemous, wouldn't it? And then fifth commandment says, "Honor thy father. I am your father." It's really not complicated, is it? You are accountable to me and I am accountable to God. There's nobody in between. It's a very, very simple system. I am no more accountable to the people than a father is accountable to his children, or a head is accountable to the body. And people say, "Oh, but he was a tyrant. He got rid of Parliament. He ruled without Parliament." Yes, I did. But Parliament was the tyranny. It is entirely within a king's right to dissolve parliaments or call parliaments as he see fit. I rule because God wants me to, and I got rid of a parliament. And what happened last year in your modern world with your democracy? Last year, my great niece prorogued a parliament at her whim because she wanted to. That is the right of a sovereign. And that parliament I did dissolve, that parliament, that was the tyranny. Do you know what they were doing in 1629, that parliament? They were passing motions against me and my rights to raise taxes. And then they weren't even putting them to the vote. They were just announcing that the motions had passed, and then they were closing their session of parliament. So yes, I did dissolve that parliament because that parliament was a tyranny. And then I ruled by myself for 11 years. I brought order back to the country. That is what I sought to do. That is what I promised to do as a king. Obviously, in the end, there was a slight problem with money and I had to call Parliament back. But it was Parliament all the way through. They started the war because they accused me of starting a war. Ooh, he's a man of blood. He started the civil war. I didn't start a civil war. It is a king's right to raise an army. I rose an army to put down a rebellion in Ireland. And then Parliament tried to take that army off me. Parliament wanted its own army. Parliament wanted my army. Would you hand your sword over to another man so he can stab you in the back? No, you wouldn't, would you? So no, neither did I. I raised loyal soldiers to protect me, my family, my rights, and the rights of every other Englishman against the tyranny of Parliament. And what did I do? Let me think. 1637, I sent the Navy over to the coast of Barbary to rescue English men and women who'd been taken there and were being held by the Moors as slaves. That's what I did. Did Parliament do that? No, I was looking out for the people. And then they put me on trial, and that was a bloody joke as well. Excuse my French, but it was a joke, because before the trial, they purged all but my most extreme opponents so that I didn't even get a chance of a fair trial. And because I refused to enter a plea, because I didn't recognise the court, because I refused to enter a plea, they then took that as an admission of guilt. They were actually making up the rules as they went along so they could get what they wanted, which was to sever my head from my body. All I was doing was standing up for the rights of all Englishmen to have a fair trial. That's all I ever sought to do. And I did look for peace. I negotiated with the English Parliament. I negotiated with the Scottish. In fact, I was very close to a deal with the Scottish. And then they sold me like some chattel back to the English. So every time I was close to getting a deal, close to securing peace, I had to renegotiate with somebody else. They constantly moved the goalposts. All the way through, I kept to my promise, which was to protect the English people, to protect the English way of life, and most importantly, to protect the church. All I wanted was one people under one God in one church. What's wrong with that?
You make your case very passionately and very forcefully, King Charles I. It's difficult to know where to start, to be honest. I'm going to choose just one. I'm going to start in 1646, and I'm going to not shilly-shally around here. I'm going to say it like it is. The truth is, Charles, you lost the First Civil War. The Parliamentarian Army won. They did. You were hiding in Oxford, and you had to escape. And you surrendered yourself to the Scots to try and do a bit of divide and rule. And I say to you, 1646 to 1647, there was an opportunity there, if you were prepared to compromise and give up some rights, to make peace. And instead, you allied with the Scots, invaded England, and started a second civil war. More men and women had to die. What do you say to that?
Well, you forget, I am not just the King of England, I am the King of Scotland. So I went up to Scotland, my other kingdom, where my loyal subjects were happy to receive me, and I was negotiating with Parliament. I was negotiating quite happily with Parliament. We were quite close to getting a deal sorted. And then my loyal subjects in England, they rose up to protect me, their king. Do you think that the whole time I was negotiating with Parliament, they were all nice around the table and they'd lain down their swords? No, they hadn't.
Yeah, we might agree to disagree on this point, Charles, but time is pressing and the lifeboat is filling up with water, so we need to make a decision a bit snappish. So I'm going to invite contender number 3, Queen Anne. Hello, Queen Anne.
Good afternoon.
Lovely to see you. The only woman here on board, our only queen. I invite you to tell us, Queen Anne, why you were such an excellent monarch and why you deserve a place in our lifeboat.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When anyone talks about me, only the briefest of outlines is given. You know that I reigned from 1702 to 1714. I was the last of the Stuart monarchs. But most of all, what you will hear about me usually is that it's all solely related to my body and my ill health. Queen Anne was so fat she had to be buried in a square coffin. Queen Anne died childless. Queen Anne was weak, gouty, pitiful. Rumours and stories of what went on at my court have even been made into Oscar-winning movies. But my reign and actions I took or instigated have had a lasting impact and legacy on this country, and I intend to briefly outline why I should absolutely stay in this lifeboat, regardless of how much weight anyone says I might be contributing to it. First and foremost, I was a diplomat, a negotiator. I was a woman in a man's world. I made shrewd choices for my key advisors in government. When it came to key positions such as Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Commander-in-Chief of Military Affairs, I chose effective men who I could trust and who proved exceptionally able. My key policy of deeper political and economic integration with Scotland allowed the parliaments of England and Scotland to finally hold sensible, practical negotiations in 1706. In 1707, this led to the Act of Union, which united the kingdoms of England and Wales and Scotland. Every time you utter the words Great Britain, you are championing a union that was consolidated during my reign. I was also a woman of great Anglican faith, and one of my significant policies relating to the church was to right a wrong committed by my Tudor ancestor, King Henry VIII. I'm sure you'll all be aware of the religious changes he made to England, which were still causing Catholic versus Protestant complications, even in my reign. Every parish had to pay something called tithes, like taxes for your soul, which since Henry's dissolution of the monasteries had been going into the royal purse. Well, I rerouted that money back to the poorest members of the Anglican clergy, and it became known as Queen Anne's bounty. I was also by and large a queen who sought peace. By the end of my reign, following a decade of conflict over control of territories in North America, a peace agreement was signed between Britain and our old enemy, France. This wasn't truly resolved until the Entente Cordiale of 1904, so I take great pride in that period of peace following my and my government's successful negotiations. And here's something else you hear very little about. I was popular. The people liked me. And for heaven's sake, there is an architectural design movement and an entire style of furniture named after me. How many other monarchs can say that they inspired a line of classically modelled, aesthetically pleasing items of furniture? Most importantly, though, I was not weak. I did die with no heir, but I was not childless. I was pregnant at least 17 times that we know of, 12 miscarriages, 4 babies who did not make it past their 2nd birthday, and 1 precious little boy, my beloved William, who died aged 11, 2 years before I took the throne. The mental strength required to process and deal with that level of grief, the physical toll, of course it took. No wonder my body was broken. I coped. I did my job. I ignored the criticisms of every man in my parliament who deemed me too infirm to rule. I deserve far more acknowledgement than the pitiful way that descriptions of me are usually phrased. And as for the relationships depicted in that movie that I mentioned, well, let me say simply this on that matter. Almost every account of me being ungainly, grotesque, indecent, or spoiled comes from a salacious biography of me published by my former friend, Sarah Churchill, after my death. Historic portrayals of me have been based for 300 years on descriptions of me written by a woman who hated me so much by the end of my life that she did not even attend my funeral. A revision is required. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, you are considering our fate today, and I will end by saying this. Of the 3 of us here in this lifeboat, many slanders have been made against our characters. You have heard of treason, conspiracy to murder, but if the worst that can be levelled against me is that I was fat and ugly, then I will take those over treason and murder any day. I was much more than just a ridiculous caricature, and I absolutely deserve to stay in this boat. Thank you.
Queen Anne, you make a powerful case, a very strong case.
Thank
but
you.
I can't let you off completely. I have to at least challenge you on one point, and that's your favourites. First Sarah Churchill, then Abigail Masham. You showered them with jobs, money, roles, access, status. Did that not cause tensions at your court and between the different political parties? Was that wise?
Well, look, Caroline, we've all got best friends. And at the time that I came to the throne, I trusted Sarah implicitly. And yes, I was very generous. Perhaps some might say a little too generous. I mean, the most generous gift I gave Sarah was Blenheim. But I like to think that when I realised that she wasn't taking her role seriously, I'd like to think I removed that power from her. And dear Abigail, sweet girl, she was a friend towards the end of my life when Sarah and I had fallen out bitterly. And we all give our friends gifts. I was just being generous.
It's an answer, I suppose. I think it's time we invite all the monarchs back into the lifeboat, because let's face it, this is a life and death situation for one of you. So is there anything any of you would like to say about your fellow monarchs to perhaps try and earn your place in the boat?
Well,
anything, Richard III?
I was very moved by the testimony from Queen Anne, which reminded me of my own beloved Anne. I too have experienced devastating loss. It has to be said, of course, had I been allowed to reign for my allotted span, then there would have been no Tudor, no Stuart dynasty, and we would be a Catholic country, and there would be no internecine strife between the crown and the state over religion. So all of these problems could have been avoided had only my enlightened rule been allowed to hold sway.
And any final words, perhaps, from you, Charles I?
Other than that, I refuse to recognise the right of any of you to judge me. No, I have nothing to say.
As expected. Yes, thank you, Charles. As expected. And I think Anne made her case so powerfully that I'm actually going to say, Anne, you're in the lifeboat. Your place is safe.
Well, thank you. Nothing less.
What else could I do? So I am faced with a terrible burden to sacrifice one for the sake of all. What to do? I'm basically forced to choose between a man who most likely killed his nephews and a man who was so unpopular that his own subjects were prepared to risk their lives and go to war against him.
Vile calumny.
I say it's got to be King Charles I. Be over the side with you.
Yes.
King Charles I. And arise, Dan Bidewell, Blue Badge Tourist Guide. Hello. Everyone, let me now reintroduce you to Tim Hudson, Dan Bidewell, and Leo Heaton, our amazing monarch impersonators today. Thank you all so much. That was absolutely fantastic. I think we'd all probably like to get to know you a little bit more. So if I start with you, Tim, you're obviously a huge fan of Richard III. Where would you like to visit in London to learn more about him?
Well, I do like going to the Tower of London, where I have a spirited defence of King Richard and point the blame pretty unequivocally at Henry Tudor, the most likely murderer of the princes.
Good point. And Charles I beg your pardon, Dan Bidewell. I'm still overcome by the force of your personality. Dan Bidewell, do you actually even like Charles I?
No, he was awful. There's nothing redeeming about him. He was absolutely dreadful. I am a big fan, though, of his wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. She was really good value for money. And I quite like, for example, the Queen's House in Greenwich. I like Guy de Maupassant, built, not for her, but she completed it. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Queen Henrietta Maria.
Yeah, I agree. Queen's House is beautiful. And Leo, if people wanted to find out more about Queen Anne, where would you recommend they go?
Oh, well, Queen Anne, whenever I guide somewhere like Kensington Palace or like Hampton Court, there are lots and lots of stories also about Queen Anne's big sister Mary, but lots. I have not just from doing this for you all today, but in general, I have a real soft spot for Queen Anne. There's a lot more to be said about her than just the fat one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's programme, everybody. Don't forget, if you go to the Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk, you can find out more about us and all our fellow Blue Badge Tourist Guide colleagues. You can find out about the tours we're able to offer when we're not in lockdown. And you can follow the links to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can rewatch the video and all the other broadcasts that Guide London have been putting on. Next week is very exciting. Next Tuesday is Her Majesty the Queen's birthday, our longest reigning monarch ever. So we're going to have a whole week in honour of that. Monday will be a birthday party with songs and cakes and reflections on her life. Wednesday will be all about Windsor Castle, her favourite castle, a little bit about George III, who particularly liked Windsor Castle as well. And Friday will be about one of my favourite TV programmes ever, Netflix series, The Crown. So we hope you can join us then. In the meantime, it's goodbye from King Richard III.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from King Charles I.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye from Queen Anne.
Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
And goodbye from me, Caroline Piper, representing the British people. See you soon. Bye.